We're doing this story again. The Electoral College is extremely important. I'm going to explain why. First, from the Washington Times, Rep. Stephen Cohen introduces constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College. My God, is that a terrible idea? And it's almost like Mr. Steve Cohen is either unabashedly trying to benefit his party for the time being at the expense of the entire country and his party in the future, or he's just not that smart. Because children in grade school understand why we have the Electoral College. Maybe not the complete nuances of why it exists. But it's no surprise to me, and it's always Democrats complaining about this, at least in the past decade or so, because the Electoral College has typically favored Republicans for the time being. But the Electoral College is extremely important. I'm going to explain to you why, but first, let's read this news. Oh, also, one of the first things they proposed was impeaching Trump right away. It's like, come on! Can we have some real legislation and stop culture warring, I guess? A Democratic House member introduced two proposed constitutional amendments on his party's first day in power, one of which would abolish the Electoral College. Stephen Cohen, Tennessee Democrat and a Judiciary Committee member, said in a statement that proposal was inspired by his party's defeats in two presidential elections in the past generation, Al Gore in 2000 and Hillary Clinton in 2016. In those races, the winner of the popular vote did not win the election because of the distorting effect of the outdated Electoral College. Wrong. Americans expect and deserve the winner of the popular vote to win office because they don't know history, or they don't... If you really expect the popular vote to win, you know nothing of the American system, and I just recommend you go and read about it. I'm going to explain it in a second. More than a century ago, we amended our Constitution to provide the direct election of U.S. senators. It is past time to directly elect our president and vice president, Mr. Cohen said in a statement. No. The other amendment proposal is also squarely aimed at Trump. It would bar a president from pardoning himself or numerous close associates. I'm not too opposed to that. I don't think the president should have the power to pardon his, it's a conflict of interest. However, I guess then you have the problem of restricting executive authority over the executive branch, and it can become cumbersome, but, I don't know. It apparently would not follow the custom, as did the 22nd Amendment, limiting presidential terms, for example, of having the bipartisan gesture of a grandfather clause stating it would not apply to current office holders. Presidents should not pardon themselves, their families, their administration, or campaign staff. This constitutional amendment would expressly prohibit this and any future president from abusing the pardon power, he wrote. Constitutional amendments being passed through Congress require approval by 2/3 of both chambers and then by 3/4 of state legislatures, meaning measures perceived as essentially partisan have no realistic chance of passage. Yes. First, let's give an honorable mention to the Democrats for making these ridiculous proposals as soon as they took over the House. Why are you... Look, you're not going to impeach Trump. Give me a good reason why the man should be impeached. The economy is booming. Unemployment is way down. We're pulling out of Syria and Afghanistan. It all sounds good to me, right? And I don't like the guy. I don't like the guy personally. I think he's got a bad attitude. I think he's got a bad character. And I'm not a fan of what he was doing with Saudi Arabia and Yemen. But then he kind of turned things around with Syria and Afghanistan. Now I'm like, oh, anti-war stuff. Okay, that's pretty good. Now, I'll tell you my honest opinion. I think the reversal on Syria and Afghanistan, more so Syria because Trump did fire Tomahawk missiles at Syria, I think it has to do with the American budget. I think Trump's trying to cut costs. Hey, let's stop wasting money over there and start spending money over here. And that makes sense to me. But again, it's my opinion. But I will admit that I'm very happy with the decision to pull out of the Middle East, for the most part. I'm a center leftist. I'm not very strong on a lot of my opinions. Let's also give an honorable mention to the sore losers who are upset that they didn't win the Electoral College, so now they're literally trying to abolish it. It's no surprise to anybody that if you ask Democrats, should we abolish the Electoral College, they'll say yes. But I need to explain to you why the thing is so damn important. And to do so, first, for those that don't know what the Electoral College is, basically, when a state votes overwhelmingly for one or the other party, their electors will vote in response. So what happens is you have, I believe, 538 Electoral College members, and then you need 270 to win. This is actually really good and important. Some states have a ridiculous amount of citizens and a smaller proportion of electors compared to states like... So typically, a place like Wyoming is going to have a disproportionate amount of electors compared to their population than, say, California. When you frame it like that, people in California who are overwhelmingly blue go, well, but, we've got 30+ million people who voted for Hillary Clinton. Why didn't Hillary Clinton win the popular vote? And it's simple. We don't want specific regions to hold power over other regions. So let's say we get rid of the Electoral College. What happens? Now you only see campaigning in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, and then maybe some smaller but still big cities. Why? If all that matters is you win the popular vote, then the politicians ignore the less populated states. And that means the interests of these less populated states, which typically will be at odds with big cities because you have different industries there. And I'll give you a really, really good example. I was in California during the drought a few years ago. I produced a series of videos. They're on my main YouTube channel. We interviewed farmers about the difficulties in farming. And there was an environmental disaster looming on two fronts. The first problem we experienced was that farmers couldn't use surface water from rain. There was very little rain, but they did have surface water. They couldn't use it. Why? Well, it is complicated, but one of the problems is that San Diego and Los Angeles, much, much bigger than Tulare County. I believe Tulare County has something like 300,000 people, but it's one of the biggest pieces of the Californian economy. It's very important. I believe it produces a third of the U.S. economy, like some ridiculous number, maybe the U.S., but like in California, they produce a massive amount of crops that go all over the world, okay, and dairy. They make most of California's money. But because L.A. had something like, the county has like 13 million people, when it came to a straight popular vote of the state, when people said, how should we vote? Should we allow farmers to use their fresh water from the sky and from the air and their surface to water their crops and grow the food that we need for our economy? Or should we make sure that water goes to the people of California? Essentially what happened was the cities outvoted the tiny, tiny communities saying, we get the water. Now there's one good argument. You've got 13 million people, they need drinking water. Maintaining the drinking water of people is more important, I think it's fair, than growing crops. If the economy tanks, but you have water to drink, well, at least you're still alive. If you don't have water to drink, you won't have an economy either, so the prioritization can make sense to a certain degree. However, farmers responded by pulling fresh water from the ground in ridiculous numbers. At one point, we talked to a guy who drilled a hole that was like 5,000 feet deep to find water. This had another devastating impact. The poor people in Tulare County, like East Porterville, had no water. They get their water from wells. They're not rich people, they're not in plumbing systems, they're poor. When the farmers started ripping out the groundwater as their last resort to grow their crops, it dropped from like a 35-foot bed, meaning a 35-foot well would get water for your family, to thousands of feet. Essentially you have a city, and there's water underneath it, and everyone's dipping their straws into it in desperation. There was surface water, they weren't allowed to use it. This is what happens when you have a direct popular voting system. Now don't get me wrong, it's complicated. But the second front was that you had people arguing we should be able to divert fresh water from the California Delta, which is by San Francisco, south to the farms to make up for the fact that we don't get fresh water. And this is a big debate. But when I talked to the farms in the Delta who opposed this, there's one really good reason. San Francisco Bay has fresh water and salt water pushing on each other. And at a certain point, it's fresh water, and it slowly starts becoming brackish and then salt water by the ocean. Essentially, the fresh water is pushing the salt water back out into the ocean. If you divert fresh water from the Delta to the south, what ends up happening? Salt water rushes in and destroys all of the Delta farms and all of the Delta towns because they no longer have fresh water. But this was a serious argument, and it's extremely dangerous when you realize the people who live in the Delta are underpopulated relative to the cities. That means, without balanced voting, representing the interests of different industries, direct democracy results in the oppression of the minority by the majority. This leads to something really obvious. The destruction of the entire state. They'd have no economy, they couldn't balance things properly. So let's talk about the Electoral College in a bigger sense from that example. What would happen then if we got rid of it? Wyoming, Montana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Nebraska, Missouri, Wisconsin, Michigan, these states, they would lose all power. And the interest would then be directed strictly at these big cities. We would quite literally end up in a Hunger Games type situation. And I don't mean young people killing each other in arenas, I mean one big capital city with all of the power. What would end up happening is, someone would say, why would I want to live in Montana when I have no voting power at all, when my interests never get represented? And the politicians never even come and bother to talk to me. The only real opportunity is in the cities where your voice can be heard. And thus, without the Electoral College, even outside of the doomsaying, people will start to gather in urban environments more so, and the rural environments will start collapsing, and that's bad for our survival. Food comes from farms, not from in the cities. Cities are hard to maintain. We need to maintain a balance between different areas. It's not about one person, one vote. It's about industry and balancing an economy. And that's why the Electoral College is so important. Thank you for tuning in to this anecdotal history lesson from Tim Pool and why I think the Democrats are so destructive in this end. Look, their interests are clearly urban. They don't understand what goes on for these rural areas. And in places like California, where they have direct representation, not a balanced representation, they have direct democracy, the cities can outvote the rural areas and starve them out of resources. And that's scary. It is. It's hard to balance. It truly is. But getting the Electoral College is not about some archaic institution. It's about balancing the interests between different population levels. There was a time when California had no population, and the Electoral College was very beneficial to them. But now that it's not, they want to oppose it. Go figure. Nah, that's not how it works. Anyway, stick around. I got I got some more stories coming up. It'll be on this channel, and I'll see you in a few minutes.